Hi everyone, my name is Janelle Brown, I'm Programs Manager here at the Broad. I'm very excited to welcome you to the fifth in our series of Soul Nation Gallery Talks, in which we've invited a plethora of voices, gallerists from the era of the show, younger artists, community organizers, scholars, to offer a non-institutional, non-curatorial, what have you, sort of voice in relation to Soul Nation. And it is my pleasure to welcome Mr. Dale Brockman Davis. Who, of course, I think many of you know, but for formality's sake, I'm going to read his bio. Dale Brockman Davis is an artist and curator and is the co-founder, along with his brother Alonzo Davis, of the influential Marc Bradford-based Brockman Gallery. Brockman Gallery exhibited several Soul Nation artists, including Betty Starr, David Hammons, John Outerbridge, Romare Bearden, Elizabeth Catlett, and Noah Purifoy, as well as housed artists and provided them with studio space. Davis was also a longtime art teacher at Dorsey High School in South Los Angeles. So a little bit just logistically about how we're going to do this is we're going to walk backwards to the exhibit starting right here. And because the two galleries that Dale will orient his talk around are small, we're going to give you a few minutes to walk through them. And then we're going to meet in the gallery in the Art on the Street Figuring Black Power Gallery, and you can ask any VSAs that are dressed in black, Visitor Services Associates, to direct you there. But we're going to spend 5 minutes just kind of perusing so you get a picture of what Dale's going to talk about. So it's going to be in the LA Assemblage Gallery, which you can ask about as well, and the 3 graphic artists. So once we'll get there, we'll kind of point that to you, give you about 5 minutes, and then we're going to end up in the Art on the Street Figuring Black Power. Okay? Everyone got the game plan? Yes. Okay, cool. We're going to get started, okay? Walk this way.
Okay.
Oops, sorry. You go ahead. I was going to go lead them.
Oh, okay.
My name is Dale Brockman Davis, and I'm part of the brother team that opened Brockman Gallery in Leimert Park in 1967. There are some very interesting things about this exhibit for me personally, and I'm sure for you for a lot of other reasons. And I'm happy to start with the Elizabeth Catlett piece here called Unity, because it was one of the proudest part of the Brockman collection. It's now part of a whole nother collection. And I noticed when I was anticipating the opening of this Broad show that some of the flyers on the street used this piece as a guide that the Broad was having this exhibit. And so I was touched by the fact that they were using it, but I also thought it would be a good jumping off point or starting off point for you as the audience to realize that the history of the piece did not start here at the Broad or with the new collector. This is a brochure, excuse me. This is a brochure that was published by the California African American Museum, which is featuring the same piece. We owned the piece actually during the period that we were open, which was about rounded off 20 years. My brother Alonzo and I would buy work from each show. Part of the reason was we were embarrassed when we would have a whole show and nothing would be sold. These are just facts that you have to live with. So as artists, we were also teachers, but as also artists, we were dedicated to the fact that we should be committed enough to the works that we showed to buy a piece or two from each exhibit. It turned out over time, because we did this for almost 20 years, that we had really kind of amassed a pretty serious collection. Another part of this that you should know is that we didn't always buy it for ourselves. We bought these pieces as gifts to family. So birthdays, Christmas, My mother and my father, who were in different states, were receiving these gifts yearly. Never did we think that at some point in time they would leave, and they would leave the artwork to us. And so all the artwork that we gave as gifts came back to us as a gift. Elizabeth Catlett, just as kind of a sidebar, was from Chicago. I believe she was married to Charles White for a while. She eventually became an expatriate and moved to Mexico City. We also showed a lot of her work. If your work was truly exemplary in Mexico, your work was considered a national monument. And it was very difficult for you to show work outside of the country without having the proper paperwork. We were able to convince some people to allow us to borrow works to have a major show at Brockman Gallery during this period of time. So take a close look. I'm proud to say that the piece has weathered well and is now part of a major museum collection. I have my crib notes here so that I don't tell any lies to you. Alonzo and I were very fortunate in 1967 to have three very important mentors. Charles White was one of our mentors. Bill Paggio was one of our mentors. Bill Paggio was part of the Golden State Mutual Art Collection grouping. He was a PR person, but he was also the person who was buying work for their collection, which was a very, very strong collection for many, many, many years. It's now kind of dissipated a little bit. Some of it was sold, and some of it now belongs to, I guess, kind of the city, being housed at the Bilbrew Library on El Segundo Boulevard in Compton. If you're truly interested in finding out more about those things in the collection, go by Bilbrew Library. They have some very nice things there. The other person on the list of mentors was a senior woman named Ruth Waddy, who, very strong person. She was part of the team that published the Samela Lewis two books, Black Artists on Art, two publications that if you're interested in more about art from that period, you should search and find out who was there and who's still important in this world of art. I was doing some reading of the Soul of a Nation catalog and realized that 1/3 of the artists who are represented here were from the South. Part of the Great Migration. You know, things you read about. I was not a history buff, but as I got older and realized I was part of this history, I realized that because I left a small town called Tuskegee, Alabama in 1955, that I was a part of the Great Migration. Any questions about this piece in particular? Can we go to the next room? This is red mahogany. Mm-hmm.
Stay here.
Okay.
We were just gonna go and keep talking right here. We have to stay here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I have another reference for you that relates to the Broad.
Sorry, everyone, we're staying in this room.
Give me my cue when we leave. Another reference related to the Broad is Art Marc Bradford. Marc Bradford was the second artist from our community to receive the MacArthur Foundation grant. And that grant is given to what they call, it's also known as kind of like the Genius Award. And it runs about $750,000 for an artist to do his or her art. I met him because I had read an article in a local paper that said that he had just received this award, and I thought, he's the second one from the neighborhood to receive this Genius Award. What does this mean? The first one was David Hammons. You may or may not know of his work, another person to look up. So as a person that's grew up in the community, I felt like I was obligated to at least write him a note to say congratulations. I didn't know him at the time. I took the note. I found out where he had a studio space on Lemert, slid it underneath his door with a card, and he called. After he called, I realized really what kind of person he was, because he wanted to see who I was, and he invited me to tour his studio, see his work, and eventually offered me an artist in residency at the Art and Practice Foundation, which is now a very big thing in that they own a lot of the property in the neighborhood. They actually have sponsors, and they have big gallery space. Eventually they will have, the plan is to have restaurants and a lot of other activities going on. They also purchased I think there's 7 storefronts on Degnan where we had Brockman Gallery, one of which they're using for an outreach program that's also still in the workings to become a regular, open opportunity for community. Yes. Sandra. What you're not seeing is a man and a woman carved. And so this is about men and women and the power that we should have together. I think it's worth, if you haven't seen it, it's worth your coming around to see. It's a beautiful carving, and it's made out of red mahogany. Any other questions related to this?
I have inside information. Tell the story of how, did you tell the story about how you got the piece from Mexico?
Not all the detail, other than we were able to get the proper paperwork. We drove, I didn't drive, my brother drove with 2 other artist supporters to the border to pick it up. Things were shipped to the border. That's all I can really tell you about that part. That's all I'm willing to share. But that's how it came to Los Angeles. Yes. Yes, Kristen. No, they don't want you to touch it. Back to my notes. Let's see, what else can I fill you in with? Back to the mentors. When thinking about presenting to you, I realized that the 3 mentors I had were probably the best I could have had, and that because I have lived the life for so long, that I had now become the mentor. It's a privileged position to be in, to have this history, have a living history, to have knowledge about things that go beyond what you're going to read in Soul of a Nation and other books. Firsthand, what the artists were like, who the oddballs were, who got along, who didn't believe in us. You have all those kind of issues. Because of the period of time that we were open, there were many other cultural institutions that were being formed. So we had POSLA, we had Studio Museum, we had Studio Museum in New York, you had Watts Writers Workshop, we had through the UCLA Film Department, there were a large number of African American young filmmakers who were doing very interesting things that are still being noted for their work. Barbara McCullough, Larry Clark, a whole series of people. So it's a very interesting period to really kind of grow up. And I say grow up because I was 20, and I'll see you have a question, and my brother was 24. So if you look at that in terms of where you are now, didn't happen so young. Does not happen so young anymore. But that's not to say it can't or won't. The idea is to have the mission, work with the mission, and do all the follow through that's necessary, because it becomes a part of your life, essentially. Injustice Case was shown at Brockman Gallery about 1970. That's the piece, I think, a couple galleries over. Very controversial. David Hammons, young man that lived in the community. I never knew the contact and the kind of relationship I would have with him. But because he lived in the community, walking distance of the gallery and walking distance from where I lived, the relationship went on and on and on. We met casually at LACC. If you know anything about David, David is the kind of person you want to read about. He's quite a character. He will light down anywhere he wants to. He, once again, he was one of those people who was first recognized for the Genius Award, the MacArthur Foundation Award. Very political, very clear. The Injustice Case piece with the flag wrapped around the frame and the mask, the muzzle, the whole bit, was shown in Brockman. Very controversial because it was so strong. People didn't want to understand it. But if you were a political person, you did understand it. And the fact that LA County Museum bought it from us was shocking. And for the longest time, I wasn't sure what the real purpose of the purchase was, if it was a ploy to get it out of the community. These are things that we may find out later. But they purchased it, and it disappeared for probably 4 or 5 years. Was shown once, I believe, with the 3 graphic artists, David Hammons, Timothy Washington, Charles White. So we had this relationship with that group of artists. That's another exhibit that you owe yourself time to go and see, 3 graphic artists. Question?
The same artist, can you explain, because I couldn't understand Black first, America second.
It's a point of view. The point of view is, I'm black first, and then as well as now. If you walk through the museum door, you're going to be perceived as black first, black woman first, and then everything else comes after. So it's a point of view. I mean, David Hammons is one of those very interesting characters. He's considered one of the best in the world at this point. And he loves to play games with you. I know there's a story about, and there are pictures about him in New York, in Harlem, selling snowballs on a snowy day. Stacked. And serious about it, If you met him, if you have an opportunity to see him, and by the way, there's an exhibit, it's a retrospective. No, it's not a retrospective, it's new work by David Hammons at Hauser and Wirth. I haven't gone to see it yet, but I plan to. So a real character. He's the kind of person who, he went to Otis, well, let's say he watched while, and people are laughing because they know the backstory. There were a series of African-American artists who went to Otis all at the same time. Unheard of. All African American artists all at the same time. David was among them. He was not registered in any classes. It was the same thing that happened when he was at LACC. He was around, he was taking it in, learning, not interested in going through the academic course, right? So of all the people that have, gone the farthest, it's David, the one who did not attend class, right? But probably the most observant and the most astute, because you don't go that far being a dummy or not aware of games that are played, how to play the game. Real character. Another inside story, there was an exhibit in New York that he was not invited to be a part of. So he decided that he would make a scene, and so he rented a limousine. And he circled the gallery basically all night until everybody wanted to know, who's the celebrity? What's going on here? Right? So he stole the show, right? And that's the kind of person that David is. Not to be confused, not to be misunderstood. Another insight story on David is he's known for going to an art opening and shaving his head and beard and mustache off on one side of his face only. And he would pose, right, to let you know he was there, and he was there for a reason. I mean, he has game. He has game. Very interesting young man. Any other comments, questions?
How about some of the artists in the LA Assemblage Gallery? Your work with Noah Purifoy.
Noah Purifoy. We'll kind of pick some out. Noah Purifoy was early mentor for a lot of artists. I met him, here it is once again. I'm undergraduate at USC, trying to break out of a traditional kind of look at art, and had already made some moves to do non-traditional ceramics. Was part of a major exhibit at Rogers Park. I'm not sure what the new park name is. It was called Rogers Park. It's got a new name now. And in a place that was very traditional for underserved artists. The gymnasium, right? Basically, as black artists moved into the field, you either showed in a basement of a church, or gym, or those kind of facilities. And that's where that's where I had the first opportunity to be a part of a major exhibit with Noah Purifoy, Judson Powell, Betty Saar, David Hammons, John Riddle. It just goes on and on and on. A lot of the major artists that are in this exhibit were part of that early team, Gloria Bohannon, early team of artists that were gathering in the neighborhood of Watts to form a collective. Another young artist from the period who is a super muralist person. He's not in the exhibit, but who was a part of the same culture. Got to get the name right. I need some help here. Muralist. Can you think of the muralist who does major murals in context? Richard Wyatt. Richard Wyatt was just a young kid who was a part of the Watts Chalk-In. So he was probably 10, 11, right? So he was being recognized then. He was also part of the program of young artists who went to Otis on Saturday scholarship, who studied under Charles White, Bill Paggio, and others. He's now one of the major muralists and major artists in LA. John Riddle. by the way, is having a retrospective at the new name, old museum space. I believe it's now called the Craft Contemporary, which will open next month. I'm not sure the exact date. It's definitely an exhibit to see. And you'll see a lot of monumental work by John Riddle. John Riddle was a person who really impacted my life in that he was the first African American ceramic artist that I ever met. And it turned out that we tracked the same kind of way in that he taught at LA High School and I taught at Dorsey High School. And so here we are, two rare birds, both teaching ceramics in schools from the community. Big difference between myself and John is that John covered pretty much all medium. He didn't do murals, but he did large paintings, did a lot of ceramic sculpture, a lot of welded sculpture. It's worth taking the opportunity to go to the Craft Contemporary and see this work. It's phenomenal.
Can you talk about the other work that you did with the gallery, like Brockman Gallery Productions, and also providing folks with space? Can you just talk about that?
Because there were so many institutions that were being formed at the time, the flavor of the day was get involved, and so we had a lot of volunteers. We had a lot of people with a lot of expertise coming from a lot of different backgrounds. And so I think it was maybe 71 or 2, we created Brockman Gallery Productions, which was a nonprofit arm of Brockman Gallery. It's kind of like a hidden secret. People didn't really understand that there was a difference between the two. But we had grants writers. We thought, because we'd been somewhat successful with Brockman Gallery, that maybe we could do this. And we learned right away that no, you need specialists for this. You need people who write grants only. And we had the great fortune to receive $1 million CETA grant. CETA stands for Comprehensive Employment Training Act. So that opened up a world for us in that we could now hire young people to do film, teach film. We had film festivals. We had festivals in the park. For those that don't know Lamert, the way it started, it's a whole new place now. It's fenced in. But Lamert Park used to be really kind of just a free area to come and participate with the community. We used to do yoga in the park at 6 in the morning. And remember now, I'm still teaching. We would do yoga in the park, go back home in pajamas or whatever it is that we tracked in, get dressed, go to work, right? And we had enough people there to make a statement about it. We had a mime on staff named Hayward Coleman, who had been a part of, who was the famous mime? The mime that's known, it's Marcel Marceau. He had started with Marcel Marceau. So we had these gifted people that were looking for an opportunity to share the gifts that they had. And we were fortunate, we worked hard, and so we had this great collective called Brockman Gallery Productions. Part of Brockman Gallery Productions were these 7 storefronts. Ben Caldwell, filmmaker, same group I was referring to, the black filmmakers from UCLA. Ben Caldwell still is on the block. He has a company called Chaos, and I invite you again. He's the kind of person that you could just walk up to him and be ready for conversation. And he's full of it and informative. Very, very, very interesting young man. Questions? Yes?
When you started Brockman, what was your motivation?
Great question. Great question. In 1966, my brother and I decided that we would drive across country and tour basically the nation to see what opportunities were there for African American artists. And so in a Volkswagen Bug, now you know how small they are, the first leg was to drive through Texas. Well, the challenge there was, the reality of it was, this is 1966, you're not going to have, if you're a black person, you're not going to have a place to just stay unless you had family there. We had no family there. We had no relatives there. We had no contact there. So we drove through Texas. The rule was, we both drive until the car is empty. So you drive a Volkswagen Bug until the gas tank is empty, you've driven a long way. And then the other part of the rule was, as long as I need you to stay awake as the partner, you stay awake because you are the team. And so we would switch off until we got through Texas to Louisiana, which is really our first stop. So we had an opportunity to see things we'd never seen before, because in driving cross country, it's all like slow motion. So not only is it the territory, but it's the kind of people, it's the environment. One of the most interesting things I've ever done really was to drive cross country in a car. And so we kept, stopping and visiting. We were born in Tuskegee, Alabama, so we got a chance to stop there and see the Carver Museum, which as children we used to go and kind of walk through, not realizing the impact, the real importance of the activity as children. Because remember now, I left when I was 10. So that means that walking through the Carver Museum and seeing vials with sweet potatoes and peanuts and in the old school, I don't know if it's like that now, but things would be in vials and it would be in red water and green water and blue water or formaldehyde or whatever it was. Very interesting. Very, very interesting. So that was, that's the upbringing. That was the beginning. And then working our way, across all the southern states. Jackson, Mississippi. We have family in Jackson. Now, our people are from the South. So once we got to the Deep South, we had a place to stay all the time. There was no problem. Very interesting thing to do. And then across the East Coast, into eventually New York, which was very intimidating. I don't know if you've all gone to New York, you know if you're new, it's a lot to deal with. So the first day there, we refused just to go into New York, so we stayed in New Jersey. We chickened out. It's like, no, we've had enough. We've driven a long way. This is really intimidating. Let's get a good night's sleep and then make the lunge. But we also made contact with, and this is another interesting link in terms of period, Studio Museum in Harlem. We made contact there in 66, and in 69, we were part of an exhibit that traveled to the Studio Museum. Somewhere in Sullivan Nation book, I had the page, I may even have the page here still written. You can see what Studio Museum looked like when it first opened. Storefront, with a gallery upstairs, but opportunities that we had never seen before, just all new. Everything was new. And then from that point, we drove west across the northern states and then back into Los Angeles. Very interesting trip. So it was during this trip that we talked about the possibility of opening a gallery. So So we had nothing but ourselves to, bump off of, and to realize that there were other things that had been established that gave us the really kind of impetus to come back and do it. When we got back home and we had the discussion with the other bosses, that would be my mother and my aunt, Chief and Louise, we ran the idea by them that we were going to open. This was the key. We were going to open a gallery, and they were older, wiser, and sat us down. We had a big table discussion about it, and they were like nodding, like, well, boys, you need to get your master's in business. And we had already gone through, the school profile thing. It was enough already. And we were like, that would be nice, but no, we're not going to do that. And there was never a problem. It was just open discussion. And it was because of that kind of team that made the possibilities of Brockman happen. So even though we had forces that were like, no, slow it down, you don't know what you're doing, to have them there as backup was a big gift. Another piece related to this discussion, we have people here from the Los Angeles Public Library, and I'm proud to announce that Alonzo and I gave the archive to the Los Angeles Public Library. It's a big deal. There were other opportunities. The big romance, when I had the artist in residency at Art and Practice, I found out that the people who are interested in you will not always identify themselves. And so when I had the first open house at Art and Practice, and people came to see artifacts that we had on display, I didn't know that there were institutional leaders there shopping, right? And so why do I say shopping? I say shopping because when the archive when I finished the process, and we had a major exhibit at part of Art and Practice in another gallery space, here were those same leaders with proposals to offer us an opportunity to basically sell the archive to them. Big challenge. I purposely, as much as you're hearing me speak today, my purpose when I did interview with these entities, I didn't speak. I basically went to interview them by not speaking. I would listen to what they had to say, listen to their offers, do the walkthrough. Very interesting. Very, very interesting. I'm not here to put anybody on fire, so I'm not mentioning any names, but these are institutions here in LA. No promises, but I knew based on when we did the walkthrough, which files were opened, what they wanted, because the names in the files that they immediately pulled out, basically to prove that, oh, you have what we want? David Hammons, Betty Saar, right down the list. So a little fearful, and reason, and with good reason to think about this archive that had been produced with the help of Art and Practice. And a woman who was a professional archivist who was assigned to me, named Devin Bodor, didn't know what a good thing I had. I mean, I knew, but I really didn't know. In fact, I resisted in the beginning when the opportunity was offered to me because, it was going to be 16 months that I was going to have to work. I've been retired for 10 years. Why do I want to go back to work, right? But you sleep on it and you think about it and you go, you know what? Oh no, this is bigger than you. You have no decision in this at all. This is a must do. And because of it, we were able to create, the archive, which has like 20,000 pieces. We have multitudinous slides of artists, a lot of artifacts, a lot of things that will and should be researched. Questions?
That's time.
Time. Okay. Thank you.